The European Parliament has voted on a resolution that could lead to the EU revoking Hong Kong's special customs treatment. The city sentenced 45 anti-government activists last week. That was a development that triggered concerns in the EU. The vote, which is non-binding, urges the EU to reconsider its trade office in Brussels and impose sanctions on Hong Kong leaders, including Chief Executive John Lee. It's also seeking an International Court of Justice case against China over Hong Kong's national security law. The vote follows the conclusion of Hong Kong's largest national security trial, which saw prominent pro-democracy figures sentenced to up to 10 years in prison. They were accused of plotting to subvert the government after protests in 2019, further escalating the crackdown on dissent in the city. While the vote has passed, it will not trigger immediate action. Concrete policy decisions such as sanctions will be left to the EU's executive bodies. The EU's diplomatic service condemned the sentences last week of the activists as politically motivated, viewing them as a major setback for fundamental freedoms in Hong Kong. The United States has taken a firmer approach to Hong Kong. President Joe Biden earlier this year renewed the city's, quote, emergency status. That was a designation that began in 2020 after the imposition of the national security law. It continues to restrict special economic privileges and highlights Washington's view that Hong Kong lacks sufficient autonomy to differentiate it from mainland China. And for more, Will Denselow joins us live from Brussels. Will, what we do know is that the bill may have passed, but it is non-binding. It does not, in fact, trigger any kind of immediate action. So what does this vote, what outcome does that have for Hong Kong?
Well, first of all, it's important to note just how really strong this vote was in favour of this resolution passing, where, considering the fact that the European Parliament incredibly divisive at the moment, this just shows how much broad support there is for this measure across the political spectrum and, of course, across the EU's 27 member states. If we look at how the vote went, 473 MEPs voting in favour, just 23 voting against it, with 98 abstentions. So that really gives you a sense of just how much support there was for these measures. You ran through a number of what was included in this measure that was voted on, as you rightly say, non-binding, but it calls for a revoke of Hong Kong's special customs treatment. That was akin to a similar step that was taken by Washington back in 2020. It calls for Hong Kong's authorities to immediately drop the charges against these 45 activists and journalists, as well as dropping the charges against Jimmy Lai. Also calls for targeted sanctions on senior members of Hong Kong officials, also calling on EU member states to take their complaints about the national security law to the International Court of Justice. As you rightly say, well, non-binding resolution, not much teeth from this vote at the European Parliament in Strasbourg, but certainly a very strong call from MEPs for EU's member states to take this one step further.
Well, it's not much teeth. And in fact, some have called this, in effect, more like a policy recommendation. It may not be able to do much in terms of actual concrete action against what might be viewed as grievances with Beijing, but it is certainly enough to aggravate tensions that might be there between China and the European Union.
And certainly suggests there could well be political appetite in the future for EU member states to take action and take heed of what we've seen from the European Parliament. That, of course, will remain to be seen. We have had, though, a strong reaction from China's mission here at the European Union in Brussels, saying that these are Hong Kong's affairs and are purely China's internal affairs, adding that their laws must be observed. This, of course, all comes at a time when the EU and China is set to mark 50 years of diplomatic relations. But those ties have certainly been strained of late, especially after the European Commission behind me chose to impose additional tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles, accusing Beijing of flooding the EU's market with, as they say it, heavily subsidised Chinese electric vehicles. Subsequently, we've seen strong retaliatory action from Beijing, at least that's how the EU sees it, with probes into things like European pork and dairy. So that just shows this fractious time when it comes to relations between the two.
And thanks for that. Will Denselow reporting live there from Brussels.